Everyone say hi to Richard out there in the back right. Hey, Richard. Hey, before I get started here, there's a couple of things I want to announce. And in June, the 12th through the 14th, we have really an epic thing happening here. Is we're having the Rocky Mountain Regional Conference here at Canyon View. And I want you to know this is really for all of us. It's not just for pastors from the region. They'll be coming and they'll be bringing leaders and other people from their churches. But the reason we're having it here is I am serving right now as the regional leader for the Rocky Mountain region, which is Colorado, a little bit of Wyoming, a little bit of Nebraska, a little bit of Idaho, and Utah. There's one church in Utah. And but it's been a real pleasure to serve the Vineyard movement as being a regional leader. But every other year, they don't require it, but they suggest that we have a regional retreat. And this summer is our regional retreat, June 12th through the 14th. Now, here's what I want to say, that I think it's a great opportunity for you, everyone in this room, to come. Many people love to travel great distances to go to great conferences where they hear international speakers and great worship. Well, we're bringing it here. And so Tim Brown is gathering some of the best worship people from our region, and they're going to be leading us in worship. And we have a guy that they call him the Billy Graham of Latin America. His name is Abe Huber. And Abe Huber started the whole cell group ministry for Project Amazon. And their church in Santarém, which is just a town of 240,000, has one church of over 70,000 people. And Abe has raised up and trained hundreds and thousands of leaders that have gone out and planted churches in the Amazon, in a big city called Fortaleza, and now they're in Sao Paulo. They sent missionaries to Italy, to Mozambique, to Japan, and their next focus is they want to send missionaries to the U.S. And so Abe is going to be here to speak, and he's half American and half Brazilian, so he speaks English. And so he will knock your socks off. And I just think it'd be an incredible blessing for you to hear Abe. The second speaker we have come in is Phil Strout, who's the national director of of Vineyard. And Phil is the real deal. And he is so passionate of what he is feeling the Lord's giving him a message for us. And I just want you to know you don't want to miss this. And if you want to consider coming, go to vineyardrockymountain.com. Vineyardrockymountain.com. We have a website set aside for our region, and you can register online, or you can go out into the lobby in the information booth and you can register there. And so please consider even taking a couple of days off of work to come to this. I know it'll be worth your time. And you'll meet people from Vineyard churches throughout the region and make some great new friends. All right? So check that out. The second thing I want to announce is I just asked for your prayers. Wednesday, I'm taking a group of 4 pastors, one from Canyon City Vineyard, one from the chapel in Chicago. It's a church of 6,000 people. And a couple from Boise Vineyard, another church of about the same size of ours. And we're going to Myanmar and Thailand. And what we're going to do there is we're working with Ray Ward, who's been a missionary that we support there for a number of years. He's bringing in 50 pastors from Myanmar, and we're going to share the vision of what we've done in South Sudan. And we can't go into South Sudan anymore because of the civil war. And so we feel like the door's shut, because we knew when we went into South Sudan that that the Lord was only going to keep the window open for a short time because it's so volatile there. And so we went in and we've planted over 190 churches. And so now we feel the Lord's opened the door to Myanmar. And so if you saw the old Rambo movie where he went into Myanmar to rescue the Christian missionaries that were captured by the Burmese army because they were doing genocide on the Karen people, that's the area that we're going to go into. And so I'm leaving Wednesday, and we'll be gone about 8 days, and I appreciate your prayers that the Lord really speaks to these pastors, and we're able to partner with them. I think this is going to be bigger than South Sudan. And Ray said there are thousands of villages throughout Myanmar that have no church and no one there to present the gospel. And so we want to send indigenous church planters that already know the language, they know the culture. We want to be able to send them in, train them, and send them into their village that's assigned to them. And we want to see the kingdom come in Myanmar. So be praying for that. This is really exciting. So you're looking at me like, so what? No, this is huge. This is huge. Are you in agreement? Yeah, okay. So then we will go back in the fall, and then they'll send us their church planters, depending on how much money we raise, and then we'll train them, and they'll go out right away in October to start their churches in their villages that will be assigned. This is awesome. I am so excited. And the good thing is they're all Asian, and they're about my size. I don't know their language, I don't know their culture, but at least we look alike more than when I go to Africa. Well, God bless you. Thank you for your prayers. So, as we go into the message, I think it's good that we pray for this. Lord, as we come before you now, I pray that you would quiet the noise in our heads. Lord, I pray that you would keep at bay the distractions. And Lord, I pray that you would open our hearts to be able to hear what you have to say today, so that we can embrace that each of us has a divine calling in our life. Every one of us. And so, Lord, help us to see that. Help us to hear that. May it give us hope. May it give us peace in our hearts. And, Lord, may it give us a vision of what on earth we're on the earth for. So we commit this time to you, Lord, and ask for your Holy Spirit to come and ask for you to speak to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, years ago when Jane and I moved here from Denver, I had an old high school friend, and he goes, "Why in the world are you moving to Grand Junction?" He says, "It's nothing but barren desert there." He said, "It's the ugliest place I've ever seen." And I'm thinking, like, do you know the same Grand Junction I do? And the reason he says that is all he's done is just drive on I-70 through Grand Junction. He's never pulled off and taken time to actually appreciate all that we have here. And in 1990, in the spring of 1990, John and Fran Jessup moved here a year before we did. And we came and stayed with them. They were renting a house out in Clifton. And so Jane and I brought our bikes, and they told us, do this East Orchard Mesa loop with your bike. And it was when all the fruit trees were budding. And so we rode our bikes around that loop, and we went, holy cow, this is awesome. And we both said, we could live here. And God used that bike ride to, in a sense, plant something in our hearts to look for a job here. And John, a few months later, he called me and he said, hey, there's this agency looking for a case manager and a therapist, and I think you would fit this perfectly. So I came out and interviewed, and they offered me a job right away, and I think they were pretty desperate. But The rest is history. So we moved here in November of 91. And what a great place to live, isn't it? And, we have to just slow down, and we have to stop, and we have to just notice what we have. And a lot of people that come to visit us from out of town, I send them up on the monument. And they never heard of the monument. And they go drive around, and they go, that was awesome. Or we'll send them up on the mesa. Or they'll come here, and then they'll use this for a staging area and go into Moab. And it's just an amazing place to live. And, sometimes, though, we get so busy, I have to admit that sometimes I don't slow down to appreciate what we have here. But I think that's similar to how we live our lives in a spiritual way. Is we are just running around so rapidly, and we're so busy that we miss what God's trying to do or say in our lives. And so this is interesting as we're doing the life of Moses, that there is a point that God said, Moses, pay attention. And he did it through a burning bush, of all things. And we see this in Exodus 3, verse 1. It says, now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, which would be like the desert here, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. I will turn aside. Now turn to your neighbor and say, you need to turn aside now. And what we see here is what this is teaching us is we have to develop a discipline of being able to turn aside when the burning bushes begin to appear in our lives. And when we're driving down the highway so rapidly, it's difficult to notice, and we don't pull aside. One of the things I love to do when we're on a road trip, on a vacation, is when they have those signs that say point of interest or something like that, is I pull aside and there's a little sign there and you read something and you go, wow, that's really fascinating. I don't ever remember what it was I read, but it's very enlightening to see the history or the geography, geology of an area. But we have to pull aside, and we have to turn aside, and we have to notice. We have to be intentional about this. It may not be as dramatic as a burning bush that doesn't become consumed, but oftentimes there are situations. Oftentimes there are divine circumstances, shall we say. Oftentimes there's a still small voice that the Lord's tapping us on the shoulder, and he's saying, I want you to notice this. And so what we see here is the reality in all of our lives. There is oftentimes a cause and effect relationship with the Lord's movement in our lives. We see how God had the burning bush, and when Moses turned aside to notice it, look what happens in verse 4. When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, okay? Moses stopped, turned aside to see, and he looked at the bush. He stopped what he was doing. It says, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. This is a very powerful encounter of what we see here is that God said, called him by name, Moses, Moses. And then he named himself, "Here I am." And when in the Hebrew understanding of saying "I am," that the Hebrews don't say God because it's too holy of a name. And so God just identified himself as "I am," meaning I am God. And so this reality of Moses stopping, turning aside, and noticing is something that is very difficult for a lot of us to do, especially in our culture today, because there's so much noise, isn't there? There's so many distractions. And so some of us maybe have even developed an identity of being busy. Like there's this badge of honor. The busier you are, the better person we are. And so, how's it going? Oh man, it's just been crazy. I've been so busy, I don't even have time to part my hair. You know, anyone relate to that? And so we schedule things in our schedule, and when we don't have anything scheduled, we freak out and we try to schedule something else. And especially if we're type A personalities. I'm a type Z. But there are some that are type A that it's just go, go, go. Do. And you have no margin in your life to stop, to pull off the highway, and to turn aside to hear what God's saying. And we wonder why, God, where are you? And so this crazy, rapid, kind of stressful lifestyle that we have, it's interesting that scientists have explored that we have this thing in our brain called serotonins. And what serotonins are like the connectors of the senders and the receivers neurologically in our brain. And if there's no serotonin in between there, it can't fire. And so people who are under stress all the time, that serotonin gets depleted, and what happens is we can become depressed, we can become anxious. Many people have this panic anxiety because we're just going, and we're not stopping. We can't wake up to smell the coffee, shall we say. Just go. Dr. Archibald Hart. I should have named Joey Archibald. Archibald Yamaguchi. Kind of got a ring to it, doesn't it? Yeah. He wrote a book called The Anxiety Cure. And he makes this link between anxiety and panic to excessive busyness, where we are spinning so many plates, and as these plates are spinning, we're continuing to run around to keep those plates from falling off. And this is our life. And all we focus on is the plates, and we never have time to stop, pull off the road, and listen. We don't turn aside. We got to put margin in our life. We have to stop. We have to be able to slow down. We have to create an environment of tranquility in our soul so that we can notice the burning bush. Now, as you can imagine, have you ever been around a herd of sheep? They don't really go that fast. So as Moses is out there in the desert, you can see him with his staff. He's just kind of meandering around, just kind of tapping his sheep, get over here. He has no cell phone. He has no internet. He doesn't have iTunes in his buds in his ear. He's just out in the wilderness, in the quietness, in the solitude. All he's hearing is bah, bah. But he notices the burning bush. We need that kind of time. We need to set up that kind of an environment in our life that we regularly go to the desert to hear the voice of God. Now, 2 weeks ago, we talked about these 4 concentric circles in our lives. And at the inner core, we have the will. And this is where our ability to make decisions. And then we have the mind, that this is where we think, and this is where we have our emotions. And then we have our bodies, our physical bodies, and our soul that encapsulates all 3 is what integrates those 3 together, that makes us who we are and helps us to operate and function as people. And here's the deal. When the soul becomes depleted, when the soul becomes, in a sense, diseased, it affects our bodies, our minds, and our wills. We have a difficult time making decisions. We have a difficult time with feeling weak and tired all the time. We have a difficult time even thinking clearly, and we can't do regular things that we normally can do in our regular day because our mind just isn't working. And so I see this happening all the time around me as I interact with people. And I have a friend, and I asked him permission to talk about this, but his life has just erupted into this major, major crisis. And as his crisis just reared its ugly head in his life, just suddenly, all of a sudden he was filled with anxiety, that those panic attacks that would come on you. He was filled with fear, and a lot of it was fear of the unknown, fear of him having perceptions of things that aren't really accurate, and he thinking it was just cloudy, and he couldn't even make any decisions about anything because of all this turmoil in his soul, because of this crisis externally. And so, but to his credit, this dude did the right stuff. The first thing he did was he circled the wagons, in a sense. You know those old cowboy movies where the Indians are coming, they circle their wagons, and they're able to create sort of a buffer and a barrier to protect themselves. Well, he got his closest friends, and these are godly people that he gathered around him, and he even moved in with this couple that are like his disciples. And as he's living with them, he would call me to come over. He would call Pastor Bob to come over. And he would have the people that could speak into his life come over. And he began to be able to make clear decisions. And so one of the things that I talked to him about is, dude, with your anxiety, you got to go get medication right now. Next day, he went to see his doctor, and he got on anxiety medication, a real low dose, and he says, I only use it when I begin to start feeling that anxiety coming on. And he went to a counselor, a Christian counselor, and this Christian counselor has been helping him, and he also sought out a lawyer because he's got some legal issues that he has to make sure he has the right answers and does the right strategic things. And so then the other thing he did is he took the week off, and his family said, come out and see us, just spend time with us. And so he went out, and before he left, I took him to the airport, and I said, dude, when you go there, what I want you to do is take intentional time, get alone, get away from your family, spend some time in the Word, spend some time praying, go on walks, and just be in the presence of God, and let God renew and restore your soul. And so through that, he is coming back a different person. And so, in a sense, when we hear the voice of God, or when we sense God saying something, we got to take off our shoes. Okay, so I know Moses had a pair of Birkenstocks while he was out in the desert. And when he saw the burning bush and he heard the voice of God, God said, take off your shoes. We see this in verse 5. He says, do not come near. Take your Birkenstocks off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. You see, many of us want to see the face of God, but we don't realize when we would see his holiness and his glory, we would shudder in fear, holy fear, because he's that glorious. And that's what the picture of taking off your shoes is. It's a sacred moment. And so whenever you take time to turn aside, to see what God's saying, make that a holy moment. Be intentional. Turn off your cell phones. Turn off the music. Get out your journal. And right away, I can't get my sandals on. Right away, make note that this is a holy moment. And I'm right here in the presence of a holy God. It's interesting whenever I go to the hospital and see people that are in the hospital, I pray for these kind of encounters. You say, why? Because I know that when people are in the hospital for more than a couple of days, there's a lot of time that they're just in the room alone. And so I pray, Lord, would you meet them here? Bring your presence into this hospital room, and may they sense your presence. You see, to do this, it takes discipline. It won't happen if we keep continuing on our harried, hair-on-fire lifestyle, or when we keep so much noise and distractions on that we can't hear the voice of God, we can't see the burning bushes. Think about the things you do in life besides work and besides caring for your home and your family. Look at how much time you spend doing something. Being on Facebook, watching TV, right? Reading fictional books. You know, we all need time for downtime like that. But do you take time to turn off the noise, to be in the presence of God, and let the presence of God begin to rebuild and renew your soul? We all need that, but it takes discipline. And Ruth Haley Barton, who wrote the book, Strengthening the Soul of Your Leadership, she said, realize how thin the veil really is between the material and spiritual world. Meaning, as we go through our daily lives, just doing normal life, be praying, Lord, show me what you're doing. Help me to see your activity of your kingdom around me, and help me just to step into that. And when we begin to do that at work, in our neighborhood, at the grocery store, it's amazing what you'll begin to hear and what you'll begin to see. But we got to test the spirits. Here's a good warning. In 1 John 4:1, he said, Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. How do we do that? You need to be in relationships with godly people, that you can seek godly counsel, and you can say, I think the Lord was saying this, what do you think? And they'll say either, dude, what have you been smoking? Or they'll say, I think that could be a word from the Lord. You see, we all need to have people like that in our life that we know and we trust, and we know that they will say the honest things to us. Do you have that? That's why we need to be in cell groups. That's why we need those relationships to help us to test the spirits. Now, this friend of mine, I just texted him this morning. I said, Lord, say anything to you in your little sabbatical, shall we say, that he took. And he texted back, he said, yes, the Lord gave me this. And it's Psalm 73, 23 through 26. This is awesome. Considering the crisis that the dude's in, right? This is what the Lord gave him. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold my right hand. You guide me with counsel, and afterward you will receive me to glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is nothing on earth that I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. I can't wait to pick him up at the airport tomorrow afternoon and see how the Lord has changed his heart because of this. You see, he went away. He created margin. In his time of crisis, he went to seek the Lord. And this was the burning bush that God gave him to comfort his soul. Is your soul in unrest right now? Are you dealing with fear? Are you dealing with anxiety? Are you questioning, Lord, where are you? Take the time. Seek the Lord. Get in his word. Quiet the noise and say, Lord, reveal yourself to me. Because when we do that, we find ourselves. I really do believe this. And I think when we find our identity, it leads us to a kingdom purpose. Identity leads to purpose. When we meet God face to face, we realize he knows our name. Then he sends us because he gives us a vision of why on earth we're here. Did you know that none of you in this room are here by accident? None of you. God has a calling and a purpose for every one of your lives. And so as we take the time to seek out the Lord, he is able to speak to us. And he did this with Moses in Exodus 3:10. He says, come, I will send you to Pharaoh. This is the dude that was just trying to kill him, right? That you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? And he said, but I will be with you. And this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. God would send them back to Egypt, bring the people back to this very place, and on that mountain is where God would meet him and give him the law. Awesome, isn't it? So, knowing God, being able to slow down, turn aside, to see the burning bushes, to hear his voice clearly, what happens is God calls us out by name because he knows us, and then he says, here's what I've called you to do. And everyone has an assignment. And when a church understands this and begins to live it out, that's when a church becomes a church. It's not about this. It's not about just showing up once in a while on Sunday, singing some songs, and hearing a guy speak to you. It's about living out your kingdom purpose out there. This is what God's called all of us to do. And all we are, the ones that have the opportunity to serve as pastors, we're just coaches. We're teachers, we're trainers, we're equippers so that you can go do the work that God's called you to do. Turn to your neighbor and say, I have an assignment from God. But I know what you're saying. I can see in the look in your eyes. Who am I? I don't know the Bible well enough. I don't know the scriptures. I don't understand this stuff. I'm not a good speaker. I can't get up and speak like you. I would have a coronary if I tried to do that. I'm not a good leader. I can't lead people. And some of us are feeling too ashamed. If you knew how I failed, if you knew what I've done, God can't use me. Moses committed murder, and God called him out. God brought him to a new place. He's a reconciling, redeeming God. And he, just as he did with Moses, he'll do with every one of us. And some of us say, but I'm too busy. I got too much going on. I boo-boo. I don't want to hear it. Slow down and hear the voice of God. It's interesting. Ed Stetzer spoke at the Vineyard leadership meeting that Jane and I went to for all the regional leaders in the country and the board of the Vineyard. And they had this guy by the name of Ed Stetzer come speak. Ed Stetzer is one of those brainiac guys. I think his IQ's got to be off the charts. And he used to work for Lifeway, which is the Southern Baptist Publishing, doing a lot of church research kind of stuff. And then he's recently, a couple years ago, got hired to take over the Billy Graham ministry. And he's in Chicago, and he's also preaching at Moody Bible Church, one of the biggest, most renowned churches in the whole U.S. And so he said when Billy Graham died, he knew right away he had to clear his schedule because he was going to start getting a barrage of phone calls and appointments for people that wanted to interview him. So he got to go and interview with CNN. And the person interviewing him on CNN, and he says, interesting, on CNN and other major networks, they allowed him to basically share the gospel of Jesus in his interviews. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so the CNN person asked him, so Ed, with who you know and your circles, who do you see as the next Billy Graham? It's a good question, isn't it? And as you're looking at me, you go, I ain't Billy Graham. Yes, you are. Because here's what he said. He said, I was with his wife, and they got in an Uber car. And the lady driving the Uber car started talking to them, and as they were talking, she started talking about Jesus to them. And his wife is going, you better tell her who you are. And he goes, no, let's let this play out. And so she continued to talk, and she basically, in a very gracious way, just laid out the gospel to them of who Jesus was, what he did, how he was resurrected, and how he's calling us to love him and follow him. And she goes, what do you do? And he explained it to her, and she goes, oh my gosh, I'm trying to convert you. And Ed said, ma'am, keep doing what you're doing. Amen. That you are the Uber Billy Graham. And he says that's what he sees happening in our culture today, is that he doesn't see God raising up these superstars like a Billy Graham. That one guy is going to bring in thousands and thousands of people. But what he sees is people in the evangelical churches becoming evangelical in their day-to-day life. That's you. That's your calling. And so, again, you're thinking, I'm not an evangelist. No. Encounter God's love. And when you encounter God's love and you embrace what he's saying in the burning bush, then God helps you to realize that he knows me by name. He created me exactly the way I am. And when we develop that kind of God identity, Then he says, go love your neighbor as yourself. It's so simple, but we got to stop the craziness. We got to silence the noise so that we can be the Uber Billy Grahams of Grand Junction. And so your neighbor. Jane and I have a couple neighbors that we know that they're unchurched, and we just look for little ways to love them and to serve them. We take care of each other's dogs when they're out of town. We share tools. Well, I go to them for tools. And then I go to them and say, how do you use this? But that relationships in our neighborhood is a great place to start. Do you know your neighbors? What about the person that works in the office next to you? What would happen if every day you got there a couple minutes before them and you just prayed for them? Lord, would you help my neighbor here? Would you reveal yourself to him? And Lord, would you give me divine appointments to have with them? Or what about a family member? I got a gazillion Buddha head cousins, and I have to pray for them. Lord, help them to see Jesus through me. See, that's when we pay attention and we notice the burning bushes. And here's the thing, when we realize that God sends us, He gives us a name, He calls us out by name, and then He gives us an assignment, we realize, oh, that's why I'm here. Then we find peace in our hearts because He gives us a purpose of why we're here. In John 20:21, this is right before Jesus goes up and ascends into heaven. Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you. I am sending you, John. I am sending you, Sue. I am sending you, Richard. I am sending you, put your name there. Everyone in this room. And that's what I love about our cell group ministry, is through that, you just love the people in your circles of influence, and then you can invite them to a cell group party that you have. You can invite them to a cell group meeting. And what that does is it brings them in where they begin to start hearing God's voice themselves. And with that, the Lord's going to bring in the worship team. And then the second thing is notice those holy moments. When God's tapping you on the shoulder and says, I want you to pay attention to this. Take off your shoes at those moments. Stop. Look and listen. Pay attention as God speaks to us. Go to the desert. Take time in solitude. Be quiet before the Lord. Let Him speak to you. You know, the more crisis or the busier you get, the more you need to get away. And then the third thing is simply say yes. Say yes and follow Him. We are going to watch Moses' journey now, where God takes him and what God does in him and through him by him simply just saying yes. He went from who am I to okay, let's go. Because he trusted God. Let's stand as we worship Him.